Welcome back to Strictly Money. New banking rules have come into effect to create stronger consumer protections. There were about 60 changes made to Canada's Bank Act, which includes things like shorter wait times for resolving complaints and requires banks to meet higher standards in their sales practices. To discuss this and what you as a bank customer need to know is Jean-Paul Bureau. He is Executive Director at Fair Canada. Jean-Paul, great to have you back.
Thank you for having me, Saijal.
You know, the last time you came on, we actually discussed this. This was coming, and as of June 30th, these changes have taken effect. I know there's a laundry list of them, but let's go through some of the key ones. And we have a board. I guess the first one is that banks now have to deal with customer complaints within 56 days. And if I'm correct, this is the first time that they've actually, required by law, have to deal with it within a specific time. What's your thoughts on this and the process?
Well, I think it's a very important development. And as you said, this is the first time they're going to be required by law to meet that 56-day timeline. Currently, or before these changes were introduced, they had up to 90 days, but it was only guidance. But the reality was most of the banks took more than 90 days. And at least 3 out of the 6 big banks took about 135 days on average to resolve complaints with their customers. So this is actually a very significant change and should really help to speed up the process. And as I said, the banks are going to have to meet this new deadline now.
And Jean-Paul, just remind me, who actually resolves this? So if someone complains, where does it go?
So it's basically a 2-step process. The first step is to bring your complaint to the bank. So whoever you're dealing with at the branch, you can call their contact center. It's pretty well anyone at the bank that you're dealing with. And the bank then has 56 days to try to resolve your complaint. And they have their own internal processes for doing so. At the end of that 56 days, if you're still not satisfied, you then can bring your complaint to an external ombuds service. And currently on the banking side, there are two different ombuds services. One is called ADR Chambers Banking Ombuds Services, and the other one is called the Ombudsman for Banking Services and Investments. And at this point, the banks get to choose where you bring your complaint if they can't resolve it.
Okay. The second one, banks must limit liability on lost or stolen credit cards to $50 and also warn customers if they go overdraft.
Right.
So explain this one and what you think about it.
Well, I actually think it's a great, very practical thing. In terms of the $50 liability for fraudulent charges, let's say on your credit card, it's a minor change, but an important change. So before these rules came into force, you would have to pay the lesser of either the $50 or whatever amount was set out in your credit card agreement. But there was one important exemption from that, and that is where your credit card was used at an automated teller with your PIN number. And in that situation, you would have been liable for the full amount that could have been put on your card. So this is an important development and should limit liability for customers, at least for some, going forward to $50.
Okay.
The thing that I find equally interesting, because I think we've all been affected by it, where we lose track of the money that's coming into our accounts and going out of our accounts, and then all of a sudden you get a nasty penalty charge for either having insufficient funds, or you're somewhere trying to make a purchase and it won't go through because you've lost track. So I think getting this alert is going to be really helpful for a lot of Canadians and a welcome development. And the great thing about the alert, it's automatic. As long as you provide the bank with your email address or a phone number, they can send a text message. You'll get these alerts, and you can set the amounts where you want to get the, if it's $100, a couple of $100 in your account, then you can let the bank know and they'll send you these alerts automatically. So I think it'll save a lot of people some frustration and some agony from paying these fees that they otherwise would have had to pay.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point because a lot of people forget, and they don't keep track, and then they go into overdraft. So we want these sort of reminders, certainly. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll continue this conversation and talk about some of the other changes. Welcome back. And JP, we've been talking about some of the changes to the bank rules that protect customers. The biggest that I think, and I think you'd agree, is how they offer products and services to customers, right? The appropriateness of them. And so my understanding is there's going to have to be agreements for each product. They're looking at how they compensate employees, and even in reinforcing a blowing program. So talk to us about this.
Yeah, I agree. I think these are probably the biggest, the most important changes being introduced by the new rules. And so there's different elements to it, but one of the first and important element is the banks are going to have to find ways to compensate their employees, to incentivize them to make sure they're selling products to you that are appropriate for you and your financial needs. So I think you're going to see some changes. For example, rather than being compensated if you're a bank employee for how many credit cards you sell to new Canadians, there's going to be an expectation that your compensation is based on making sure that you're selling appropriate products to those Canadians. And to back that up, they've also introduced new requirements about that help the banks and help their employees figure out what is appropriate. And some of this includes they're going to have to know their client and understand their client's financial needs. They're also going to have to understand the products that they're selling to the clients so they can match the best product with the financial needs of each client. And I think that's a very important development.
Well, so this is really interesting because even just the upsell of products is interesting, because the onus now is really on the bank agent or advisor to show that they ask the appropriate questions. Do you think that the standard now has to go up, because a lot of these people didn't have necessarily fiduciary standards?
Yeah, so I think they are raising the bar in terms of the expectations from how the bank employees interact with the customers, but it still falls short of a fiduciary standard. So most bank employees are not fiduciaries and don't have a responsibility to act that way. But these new rules will help to kind of bridge the gap a little bit, and should lead to better results and better outcomes for Canadians using these banks to buy different products and for different services.
Okay. So these rules, I mean, when I was reading it, it said that it was 10 years in the making to get to this point. Do you think that enough was done? And how do you feel about the process? Because my understanding is they were looking for feedback.
Yes, and the pace of change is always frustratingly slow. But on the other hand, these are really important developments, and they raise a lot of complicated issues. So on their surface, they seem relatively straightforward, but there are a number of implementation issues, and that unfortunately does take time. They also had to, and I think it was smart, they consulted widely. So not only did they have public consultations on these changes and wanted the input from different Canadians, but they also consulted privately with different organizations, including Fair Canada. And so I was very happy with the process and the ability for us to kind of share our views on how they could make the banking system better for the customers.
Anything you would have liked to have seen that was missed?
There's a couple of things on the complaint handling side in particular. So right now, the banks still get to choose which external complaint body they want to use if they can't resolve the complaint themselves. And this creates additional confusion. And the two organizations are quite different. One is a nonprofit, the other one is for profit. So that raises some serious issues in terms of the fairness of the process for the customers. The other thing that is not in these rules is the fact that the decisions made by these external ombud services are not binding on the banks.
Okay.
So the banks are still free to walk away from the process at any time. And this is obviously very concerning. And
Jean-Paul, I'll have to jump in because we're at the end of the show, but I appreciate your time. Thanks so much for coming on and explaining these changes.
Thank you very much for having us.
Jean-Paul Bureau of Fair Canada. Well, that wraps up this episode. Thanks for watching.